Hello and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire. So glad you're here. Today I have a really unique, new, and cool technique that I think you'll like using stencils. It allows you to create in the corners to fill a background. Then at the end, I have a bonus technique for filling a background with stamps. These are easy techniques. You can kind of get in a rhythm and make many cards at once if you wanted to. Let's start out with the stencil technique first. I made 4 different cards with this technique all at once, and it took no time at all. By the way, I highly recommend you check out the YouTube description below because Gina K is having a really great sale right now that is definitely worth checking out. So that's in the YouTube description below. So let's get started with the cards. I will be using Gina K Design's newest card kit. This is called You Are So Loved. There are 2 6x8 stamp sets, the big size stamp sets, coordinating stencils for the floral one on the right, and coordinating dies for both. Then there is a beautiful large floral layering stencil set. So this is packed with a lot of different stuff, everything you need to create a lot of different style cards, as you can see from the 2 different stamp sets and that large floral stencil. I will be using all of these today. Keep in mind that when I put this video up, these products are all available in this kit, which is at a huge savings, but later on the products will be available separately. All right, let's get started with that large floral layering set. This is called the Dazzling Dahlia layering set. There are 4 stencils and it creates this beautiful large flower that fills the card nicely. However, I wanted to use it in a different way, and I thought it'd be fun to do part of this flower in all 4 corners on my card. Now I'm using an A2 card panel, but this would definitely work for 5x7. Notice that the top left and the bottom right stencils are layers. So those layer stencils I'll set aside, and I'll just use the solid flower and solid leaves to start with. We'll add those layers on later on. Now I want to plan this out and where it will stencil on the corner of our card. So I'm going to hold these 2 together, and I'm able to see through it to see where the overall image will be when the leaves and the stencils are done together. To make it easier to see in the video, I have cut an A2 panel, that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, from a dark teal cardstock. I will hold my 2 solid stencils together, and I will place them over that background in the corner. And I'm kind of planning out where I want my stenciling to land on the corner of that background. I'm using my glass magnetic work surface, so I have a magnet holding that teal piece in place as I do this planning. If you don't have a magnetic work surface, you could instead use a sticky mat or tape it in place. Next, I'm using a Sharpie and making marks on my stencil and my glass work surface to mark where the stencil will be each time. So I'm putting marks around the corners of the stencil right onto my glass work surface. And I also put little tick marks on my stencils. You don't need to do all of this, but I just wanted to show you different options. I then put little marks around the corners of my cardstock. Don't worry, all of this can be removed from my glass work surface and stencils with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So now I know exactly where my cardstock needs to be and my stencil needs to be each place. Now this looks a little weird right now, but I promise it'll make sense in a moment. There are other ways to do this, but I found this to be the fastest and easiest. All right, now I'm putting the first stencil, the solid flower, in place using the tick marks that I made on my work surface. I will slide into that spot for the cardstock a piece of white cardstock. This is Gina K's smooth white cardstock, and then we can start inking. Again, I'm using a magnet to hold my cardstock in place, but you definitely could use tape there if you don't have a magnetic work surface. All right, now over this stencil, I am using Gina K dye ink. This happens to be the Bubble Gum Pink. I am not making much effort to get a very smooth result because Gina's inks smooth out on their own. Once I'm done, I'll rotate my paper so that the opposite corner is under the stencil, and I will repeat the process. Notice each time my stencil is within those little corner marks I made on my work surface, as is that cardstock piece. Once I've done those 2 corners, I can move on to the next cardstock piece, but I'll first wipe my stencil clean so I can change up the colors. So I'm going to slide a new cardstock piece under there. It was kind of hard to lift it up, so I'm putting a piece of tape under the edge of the stencil with the sticky side facing up, so I can just touch it, pull the stencil up, and then slip the next cardstock piece under. This time I'm using the light orchid ink, which is one of my favorites from Gina K. You can absolutely use whatever inks and inking tools you want for this. And it's just a way to get a different look from this large floral than just putting it right in the middle of your card or towards the top or bottom. We're going to fill all 4 corners up and leave a nice spot in the center for our sentiment. So I inked up one corner, then rotated my cardstock 180 degrees, and I'm inking up the opposite corner. Now, as I continue to do this, I wanted to talk about other ideas. This was actually inspired by a video that I did for the online card classes So Very Merry. I showed how you could take a wreath and form the wreath in the corners of your background. And I wanted to just show more examples of that. If you're interested in the So Very Merry class, even though it's ended, you can still take it. You have lifetime access. And there are 16 great videos that help you to make 64 cards. So I'll put that information below. But here I'm using a variation of that technique where I use layering stencils in the corners of the background. So any kind of layering stencils would work for this. All right, now I am moving on to the next one. The last card I used light lilac, and here I'm using sea glass. This is definitely one of my favorite colors from Gina K. In fact, this light orchid and light lilac are definitely my favorites. Okay, so once I have put ink over this solid flower in 2 of the corners on all 4 of my panels, we can move on to the next stencil, which is the solid leaves. I'm just putting that right into the tick marks that I made on my glasswork surface. My cardstock is still there, and I can ink up the leaves with jelly bean green. So this will be really quick because I'm using the same green ink on all 4 of my panels. I ink up one corner, rotate it to the opposite corner, and then move on to the next one. So this is something that you kind of get in the rhythm of, and it allows you to make several backgrounds very quickly. So I decided to make 4 backgrounds today, but this is really kind of a test run because I'm thinking this could be a good set of note cards to give as gifts to people over the holidays. So I'm thinking I'll go back and make more. I'll just do like a rainbow of colors, and Gina has a few different floral layering stencils that are large like this that would work wonderfully. In fact, I'll link to a video where I showed another really cool technique using a similar layering floral set from Gina. And that link will be up here in the top right and in my description below. All right, now I have lined up the next stencil. This gives us the details or layers on the flower petals. Now on this one, I'll just do a darker color of whatever I put underneath. So this one where I had bubblegum pink, I'm putting passionate pink on top. Again, I ink up one corner, rotate it 180 degrees, and ink up the opposite corner. I can wipe off the stencil, tuck under the next one. This is the one where I use light orchid, and now I'm coming in with a light application of the dark orchid. And I really love the look of these layering stencils. They're very easy to line up and give such a really cool graphic look. In fact, if you'd like to see all of the stencil sets like this that Gina has, I will link to them in my description below. I'm thinking it might be fun to do a set of cards where it's a mix of the different flowers in different colors. This design could definitely work really well for a 1-layer card. All right, now I have lined up the 4th and final stencil. This gives us the detail on the leaves. I just lined that stencil up in the little tick marks and corner marks that I made on my glasswork surface, and I'm tucking the cardstock in, fitting it inside of those little corners I made with the Sharpie. And each time I just do the fresh asparagus ink, which looks really nice on top of the softer jelly bean green ink. So I did that on both corners on all 4 panels, and here's what we have. Now you could definitely leave this as is and stamp a greeting on it, but I thought I would add something interesting into the other corners. First, I need to clean off my work surface, and 1 spritz of rubbing alcohol or any kind of rubbing alcohol, it could be a rubbing alcohol swab or a little bit on a cloth, will take all that Sharpie off our glasswork surface and off the stencils. So now this time I will be putting my stencils in the top right corner of my panel. I'm making little corner marks for my cardstock panel, putting a magnet on it to hold it there. Then I have the 2 stencils that are the solid layer of flowers and the solid layer of leaves. And I'm just holding it over the corner to see where I want it to be positioned. I don't want to mess with masking or have any overlap, so I'm positioning these so that it doesn't overlap with what I've already inked there. Now it's kind of hard to see, but I can see in real life where the stenciling will be. So I'm starting out with the leaves first this time. I don't know why, it just was the one that was there. I taped it into my little tick marks on my glasswork surface, and I'm applying a jelly bean green ink once again. So I noticed that my inking was getting really close to the edge of that stencil. And I was afraid I would go off the edge of the stencil, so I'll just put a little post-it note there to make sure I don't go over the edge. And that post-it note actually makes it easier for me to lift up the stencil and slide in the next panel of cardstock. Okay, so I've done one corner. I'll rotate this 180 degrees and do the opposite corner. So we're filling in those two blank corners that are in between the corners we inked up the first time we did this process. So now we'll move to the next panel, start in the first corner, ink that up with the Jelly Bean Green ink, rotate it 180 degrees, and do the same on the opposite corner. Again, you could get really creative with your blending over these stencils, but I'm just doing one color per layer and keeping it very simple. After doing that base layer of leaves on all 4 panels, I'm coming in with the second layer of the leaves. So this is the next stencil. You could skip on to the flowers if you wanted to, but I thought I'd do the leaves while I was here. I'm lining up that stencil with the leaf inking we've already done and putting that stencil inside of those marks we made on our glass work surface. Inking that up with fresh asparagus, rotating my cardstock 180 degrees, and inking up the opposite corner with fresh asparagus. And then I will do the same thing with all 4 panels. All right, once those 4 panels are done, we have our leaves complete. Let's move on to the flowers. I'll start with the solid layer of the flowers, like the base layer, and I will line that up again inside of those marks that we made on our glass work surface. And then I'll put tape on it. If you have a magnetic work surface, you definitely could just use magnets instead of any tape at all for this design. Or if you're working on a sticky mat, you could use that. All right, so I've lined up the flower stencil and I am doing different color inks than what I already have done in the other 2 corners. Here I added the light lilac and dark lilac, and the original flowers were the light and dark orchid. So I just thought I'd mix it up. You could do all 4 corners different colors if you wanted to. Now over this one where I had pink flowers before, I'm doing a bit of sweet corn with a little bit of sweet mango on top, just to make that yellow a bit darker. I love sweet corn. It's one of my favorite yellows. It's a muted, not like overly bright yellow, but to make it a bit darker, I'm putting a little bit of the muted sweet mango on top. Then for this one where I had lilac flowers, I'm adding powder blue first, and this will give us a nice blue and purple floral card. And in fact, this design is a great way to try out different color combinations. Okay, after I've done that base layer of the flower on all 4 panels, time to come in with the layer for the flower, the layering stencil. So I'll line that up and ink that up with a darker color. So this one is where I did powder blue on the first layer, and I'm coming in with a very light hand of blue denim over that. This is a much darker color, so I'm going light so it's not too much contrast. Off screen, I completed that layer of flower details with a slightly darker ink than what I used on the first layer. And here are my 4 backgrounds. Before we move on, let's look at the completed cards, and I'll tell you the colors I used in case you wanted to do the same. On this first one, I used sea glass and turquoise sea, and also light carnation and dark carnation. On the next one, I use light and dark lilac along with powder blue and blue denim. And here we have light orchid and dark orchid and light lilac and dark lilac. And then finally we have bubblegum and passionate pink along with sweet corn and sweet mango. Okay, now I have some things I'm going to do to those backgrounds to step them up, a few different ideas for you, but first let's create the sentiments to go at the center. These are really special. I love the look of them and I hope you do too. Now I showed you the kit before. There is this Delicate Dahlias stamp set that's in that kit, and it's 6x8. It'll be available, sold separately later on. I love the sentiments in this set so much. I really like the style and hope Gina does more of these. And there are coordinating stencils that will color in those flowers. There are also coordinating dies that cut up the flowers, but also all of the sentiments in the set, which I'm very, very happy about. But here is what I love. As a possible add-on to this kit, you can get the Gina K Poly-Glaze foiling sheets that coordinate with that Delicate Dahlias. So you can foil these images and then use the coordinating dies to cut them out. and use the coordinating stencils to color them in. So this is an add-on, and I will be using these Polyglaze sheets along with the dies for my sentiments. So I'll demonstrate that. If you do not have a foil machine, you could always just heat emboss the sentiments from the stamp set and cut them out. So I chose one of the sheets from that Polyglaze set, and we're going to foil those. Half of them I'll foil in silver and half I will foil in gold. So Polyglaze is a product that you can foil, and it's something that Gina K Designs has. It'll be white cardstock with very light gray printing, and wherever there is that very, very light gray printing, you can add foil. And you just need a foil machine and foil transfer for it. So the foil machine I'm using is the Gina K Fuse machine. It comes with a carrier sheet, but I recommend buying a couple extra, and I keep mine in this Altenew zip pouch so that I don't lose it. It kind of looks like packaging. You don't want to lose that. If you do, you can always just fold a sheet of printer paper and that will work fine. Into that folded carrier sheet, I'll place the printed Polyglaze pretty side up, and on top of that, I'll place a piece of foil with the pretty side up. I will then run that through my fuse machine, which will apply heat and pressure. Now that foil is Deco foil. It's a fancy foil from Gina K Designs and Thermoweb. If you want to make sure you get the right foil, I just recommend getting the Gina K Designs foil. All of her foils work with the fuse machine or other laminating systems. Now, a regular laminator would work for this. However, the Fuse has these adjustable settings, and there is so much more you can do with this machine, and it is a pretty good price point considering how good a quality and great results you get. So once that goes through the Fuse, check out the beautiful foil results you get on those sentiments. It is perfect, and we'll use that leftover foil in just a moment. First, I have another sheet of printed Polyglaze sentiments with silver foil that I ran through, and look how perfect these are. Now, those leftover pieces of foil there, don't let those go to waste. Instead, we're going to run them through the fuse machine with a solid sheet of Polyglaze. So these sheets are from Gina K Designs, and it's hard to tell, but one side of this white sheet has a coating on it, that Polyglaze coating. So anywhere you put foil on it, it will stick. So I'm trimming my background down. Now I trimmed it too much. Don't trim it this much. I kind of messed it up, but it's okay. I'm trimming down my Polyglaze so it's completely covered by that leftover foil. Then I will put that into my carrier sheet and run it through. And since that entire white sheet has Polyglaze on it, the foil will stick everywhere. But those places where the sentiments are, the foil's already been removed, right? So it'll stay white there. So we'll end up with the reverse of what we got before. Before we had a white background with gold foiled letters. This time we'll have a gold foil background with white letters. And I'll do the same thing with the silver. Check out this amazing result. It's just absolutely perfect and a great way to use up that leftover piece. And here is the silver one. I'll just remove the excess and check that out. There's even extra on the edge that I can die cut little stars and hearts from. So now all of these I can use with the coordinating dies that are available in that kit. By the way, if you want your foiled sentiments on a color paper instead of just white, you can ink over the foiling. The foil will resist any dye ink, and you can end up with color with that fun foil sentiment on top. Now that we have our foiled sentiments, it's time to use the coordinating die to cut them out, and I'm excited because I get to use the new Gina K Designs mini Intri-Cut machine. You know I'm a big fan of the larger Intri-Cut machine, so this mini one is super cute, and it's very handy to have on your desk. It is a meaty machine. It cuts really well, even though it's so tiny and has a great price point. And it's really handy if you have smaller die cutting that you want to do, such as these sentiments. It comes with cutting plates for cutting and for embossing, and there are extra cutting plates available. To do die cutting, you just need 2 of the plates, and you're good to go. So I will take one sentiment. This is the You Are in My Thoughts that I did gold foil on. I will place the coordinating die on top and hold it there with a little bit of tape, making sure the tape stays on the outside edge of the dies and not on the foil. I don't want to mess up the foil. I also lined up the die for Sending Love and for Sweet Friend. That way I can die cut 3 sentiments all at once. I don't actually use the Sweet Friend today, but I'll have it ready for future cards. and I will continue to do so until my sentiments are cut out and ready to add to our cards. By the way, this mini but mighty die cut machine is available on its own or available as part of a bundle with a bunch of other new tools from Gina K Designs. That's a really great value. I'll have information that in my description below, and I'll show you some of those tools later in this video. Now we have all of our sentiments ready, even some extras, and our backgrounds. Next, let's step those backgrounds up using some different techniques and add the sentiments to complete the cards. For this first one, I'm doing kind of a popped up eclipse look, and it's very easy to do. For this, I'm using Gina K Designs Master Layouts 2 die set. This is an older die set that I've used often in videos. It's a must-have. In here, there is a rectangle with faux stitching on the inside edge. Then there is a slightly larger rectangle that cuts a really fine mat, and that really allows your cards to stand out. You can see there are two pairs of rectangles in here. They both work really well on an A2 card. I'll use the more narrow rectangles today. So I use this slightly smaller rectangle that has faux stitching on the inside edge, and I cut that from the center of one of my stenciled backgrounds. Because this is a bigger panel to put through, I am using my original Gina K Intri-Cut die cut machine, which by the way is back in stock. So there you can see that piece has faux stitching on the inside edge. Now the outside piece I'll glue onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. Then I used the slightly larger rectangle die from the Gina K Master Layouts 2 die set, and I cut that from a light blue cardstock. However, when I put that behind our piece that we just die cut out from the background, it seemed a little too light. I wanted it to be a bit darker. So I just inked up the edges with a little bit of the much darker blue denim color from Gina K, and that just makes that blue a bit darker and it stands out better. I wanted some dimension behind this, so I'm cutting a piece of white craft foam to be just a little bit smaller than that blue rectangle. Craft foam is an inexpensive way to add dimension, and it holds up very nicely through the mail. You could instead use rows of foam tape, or you could use die cut scraps of cardstock and build up dimension that way. So on the back of the blue rectangle, I put a piece of craft foam. On the front, I put our beautiful die cut piece with the faux stitching. I will then glue that into the opening on the front of our card. And you can see how you get this continuous floral pattern with that nice little blue kind of mat sticking out, which really creates a nice focal point at the center. Then I added one of my Sending Love sentiments that I foiled in silver. I did die cut two extra die cuts to glue behind it for some added dimension. Now you could add a lot to this. You could add gemstones or sequins, but I decided to keep it very clean and simple. Again, these would be great for a set of note cards to give to a loved one, but also just a great card to have on hand for any occasion. Now I really liked the results of that, so I thought I'd do another version of that. This time I used a different shape to kind of pop out in the center. This is from one of my other favorite Gina K Master Layouts die sets. This is die set 10. Those large rectangles are actually meant for slimline cards. And although I don't make slimline cards very often, I use it to create like a faux stitched border die cut or a panel to go down the center of our card. I also like these ornate frame dies. Now one of them has faux stitching on the inside edge, and then the one that's slightly bigger creates a nice mat for it. So the smaller one with the faux stitching, I'll place right at the center of this panel and tape it in place. I'll use a T-ruler to make sure it's straight first, and then I will run it through my die cut machine. I'll put glue on the back of that and add it to the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I will use the slightly larger die and cut that from Gina K's Sweet Corn cardstock, and I'll glue those two together. I will then use that die to cut from white craft foam, and yes, craft foam die cuts beautifully. It may flatten a bit, but it'll pop back up. I'll glue that into the opening. That will give us some dimension, and then glue our stacked die cut on top of it. I love how this gives a continuous pattern over the whole front of the card, but the center is popped up to give a little bit of a focal point and add some interest. At the center of that, I added our gold foiled You Are In My Thoughts sentiment and matched it up with the Gina K Designs pink envelope. Now you definitely could add a lot more to this, but I think there's something very simple and classic about it, so I'm leaving it how it is. All right, now for our third background, I'll show you a different technique, a way you can kind of step up the background without adding too much, and that is to use an embossing folder. I have my Intri-Cut and I changed the dial on the side to use with an embossing folder, and I'm placing my background into a Gina K Swiss dot embossing folder. I'm running that through my Intri-Cut, and this gives a dot pattern over all of that stenciling, which I think is beautiful. Using embossing folders like this on a stencil background is fun, and I think like a dot pattern like this is best, or like a simple stripe, not something too distracting. A repetitive pattern is good. I glued that onto a note card, and now I'm adding the "You Are in My Thoughts" at the center, and that's it. Super fast to do. Match it up with a turquoise sea envelope from Gina K Designs, and there we have our third card. Love those polka dots. The Swiss dot folder from Gina K is definitely a must-have, and I've used it many, many times in videos. Okay, now the next one is a little bit different. I've shown a variation of this technique in the past, but I'm changing it up today. I have my Misty stamping tool with a waffle flower grip mat inside. Onto it I'm placing my last background, and I have the Gina K Designs Gauze background stamp. I've used this one many times. I think it's a must-have because of the fine detail it gives. Now I'm stamping on that background with Gina K white pigment ink. Any white pigment ink would work here. This will give like a subtle fabric kind of texture to our background right on top of our floral stencil. So it almost looks like the background is made of fabric. Now I usually stamp this 2 or 3 times. It'll be very subtle. You can leave this as is, which is what I've done in the past. Or if you want it to stand out even more, you could white heat emboss it and it would really, really stand out. What I thought I'd try today is to do clear embossing on top of that white ink. Well, it turns out when you put that clear embossing over that bit of white ink, it doesn't really show up much. Like the white kind of disappears. However, it has that fun fabric-like texture to it, but texture and shine. And it's actually pretty cool. You see that? I think it's gorgeous and just a nice way to step up that background. So I encourage you to try that with any fine print stamp like that gauze one. Now I didn't do a good job getting my stamp completely on this background, so I need to cut a little bit off the top and the bottom, and I'm using Gina's new Guillotine trimmer. Yes, she has a new trimmer, and I'm going to use it to cut a little bit off the top and the bottom. I like the lines that are in the background of her trimmer. It makes it really easy to see those 1/4 inch marks and other measurements. Now to step this up, I am using Gina's new corner and notch punch. You just put the corner of your cardstock into it and it gives you a rounded corner, or the other side of the tool will give you a notch. Now the rounded corner I think gives a nice classy look, and I did the same rounding on the front of our note card and glued them together. I like that the rounding is pretty subtle and looks nice on the corner of a card. By the way, that Guillotine trimmer, one of the nice features of it, it has this little lock right here that'll keep it closed. So if you take your trimmer around with you, it's good to have that lock feature. And again, all of these tools are available together at a savings or separately. So on the front of that, I added my Sending Love sentiment, and there we have that last card. I really think the rounded corners gives a nice soft touch to this. And that heat embossed gauze texture really is impressive in real life. It adds a really nice shine and texture to it that's very unique, and I encourage you to try it. So I ended up with 4 cards that I was able to make very quickly, all with a different look to them. Now I know which designs and colors I like the most, and I plan to make more of them to do note card sets to give as holiday gifts. Now I have a couple bonus cards for you. I wanted to use one of the images in that other stamp set that's available in the Gina K kit. This is the You Are So Loved stamp set. It has a lot of great images that would work like with the postage collage die, but I'm using that one along the bottom that has the hands holding the hearts. So I have my Misty stamping tool. I put a piece of scrap cardstock in there. I didn't really need that, but I put it in there because I thought my stamp was going to hang off the bottom edge. But instead I put the stamp up on this top edge, and I'm stamping that with black ink. I really like this image, and I thought it would look neat stamped along both edges repeatedly, so there were lots of hands holding hearts and then the sentiment along the middle. So I stamped that with Gina K Black Obsidian ink. I chose this ink because after you heat set it, it works with pretty much any coloring method you want to. I ended up using Copic markers, so I knew this would work great. So after I stamped it, I rotated it 180 degrees and I stamped it again. Now my ink pad needs re-inking, so I'm stamping it multiple times, but usually you don't need to. After stamping on that panel, I moved on to another and repeated the process. So this is kind of the same idea as what we did earlier with the stencils, but this time we're doing it with a stamp. So you can make as many of these as you want. I stamped 3 panels, and then I moved the stamp to a new position. Again, ignore that blue border is there. Wasn't necessary, not sure why I did it, but really all I'm doing here is moving the stamp to the other corner of the cardstock, stamping it with black ink, and then rotating it and repeating that process. I did that on 2 of my backgrounds, and then on the 3rd one I just left it with the stamping that I did earlier. That just gave it a different look. Now it's time for the sentiment. I'll place my panel into the corner of my stamping tool, and instead of trying to eyeball getting that sentiment centered and straight, I'm using my Simon Says Stamp placement guide. This is a grid that I just lay on top, and it has those marks on it to make sure I center it and get it straight. Once I'm happy with it, I'll close the door on my stamping tool. If I wanted to, I could test it and stamp onto that placement guide and make sure I like the placement of the sentiment, but this time I felt pretty confident, so I'll just go ahead and stamp it directly onto my background. And I'll do so with all 3 of my card panels. Off screen, I colored these with my Olo alcohol markers. I'm not the best at coloring, so I didn't want to take your time showing it in the video. I just did basic coloring, but you could use any coloring method you want. I ended up only coloring 2 of the panels. The 3rd one I kind of ran out of energy on, but I actually like that I just did the skin colors on it. You can see it at the top of the screen. So I completed 2 cards. I'll finish that 3rd one later on. By the way, I wanted to show you that the coordinating die set that comes with the stamp set in the kit, look at how the die is for this hand. It actually cuts a rectangle and then cuts out those hands. So there are many really cool things you can do with that. However, I didn't use the die today. To make the matching envelope special, I used another image from the stamp set. I really like this one, and I think it'd be fun to stamp on envelopes all the time. And that kind of finishes off the look. Oh, I forgot. After I was done with my cards, I thought those hearts needed some sparkle, so I used my Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen. This adds shimmer without changing the color beneath it, so you can see the little bit of shimmer that's added to each of the hearts. It looks even better in real life. But these cards are A2 note cards, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and those envelopes are from Gina K Designs. So we have 2 different designs, and I was able to create these very quickly. And I think this type of card is definitely needed in this world today. Now before we go, I wanted to show you a couple other things. First up is this background stamp called Blossoms in Bloom. This is new from Gina K Designs too. I didn't get a chance to use it today, but I thought it would be a great one for a lot of different inking techniques. I'll try to use it in a future video. Also, remember to look at my description below because Gina's offering a great sale and a great free gift. This stamp set is free with any purchase of $75 or more. She always has a free stamp set at that price point, and this is this month's. You can buy the coordinating die set for it also if you would like. All of that information is in the YouTube description below. I thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you look at your stencils a little bit different and think about how you can fill a background with them and get a new look. If you're interested in any of the supplies I talked about, they are linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos. And as always, I really appreciate that you spend the time watching my videos. I hope they are helpful to you, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.